The legend of Sergeant Major Elias Vance wasn't built on a foundation of facts, but on the shifting sands of myth and awe. At Fort Bragg, where legends were as common as red dirt, Vance was a deity. He was the ghost of the battlefield, the man who could, they said, thread a needle from 2 miles away. His face, etched with 1,000 silent campaigns, was the face of absolute, unflinching lethality. His legend, however, was anchored to a single, impossible shot. The story was whispered, in hushed tones around fire pits and shared with wide-eyed recruits in training halls. It was a shot from over 3 miles away, a distance so staggering it defied the laws of physics and aerodynamics. The target, a high-value enemy commander, a man of such cunning and ruthlessness that he had evaded capture for years. The shot was made during a raging sandstorm, the wind howling at over 60 miles per hour. They said Vance had accounted for every variable: the wind, the Earth's rotation, the very moisture in the air, and placed a bullet squarely in the man's skull. A ghost in the storm, they called him, for Lieutenant Ethan Miller, a fresh-faced public affairs officer assigned to write a retrospective on the special operations community. The legend of Vance was an unwelcome challenge. His assignment was simple: humanize the heroes, tell their stories for a new generation. But every time he tried to approach Vance, the sergeant major would either shrug him off with a gruff dismissal or stare at him with eyes that saw through walls. Miller's editor, a bulldog of a woman named Captain Sarah Jenkins, was relentless. "Get me the story, Miller," she'd snapped. "The real story. The military needs heroes, and the public needs to know them. Get me the truth behind the impossible shot." The truth, Miller soon discovered, was a slippery thing. He started in the archives, poring over after-action reports and mission logs. The official report for that mission, Operation Sandfall, was sparse, almost deliberately so. It confirmed the target's elimination and credited Vance, but offered no details, no specifics on the shot itself. It was as if the event was too sacred, too miraculous, to be burdened with mundane facts. Miller felt a prickle of unease. He was a man of facts, of figures, of data. This was a story without a foundation that he sought out the men who had been with Vance that day. He found Major Alex Atlas Thorne, a Special Forces operative who had been on the ground. Thorne was a man of few words, his body a testament to countless campaigns. When Miller asked about the shot, Thorne's face hardened. "It was a miracle," he said, his voice flat. "That's all there is to it. The man's a legend. Don't muddy the waters." Miller, undeterred, found others. Sergeant First Class Ben Rampage Carter, now retired and running a hunting lodge in Idaho. Carter was more open, a man haunted by the memories of war. The storm was a nightmare, Carter recalled, his eyes distant. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. But Vance, he was like a rock. "I don't know how he did it, Miller. I really don't. We all thought we were dead. He saved us." The more Miller dug, the more the legend solidified. Everyone had a version of the story, a small detail they had heard from a friend of a friend. The bullet had veered around a sand dune. The wind had ceased for a single, perfect second. Vance had simply willed the bullet to its target. But no one had a single piece of hard evidence, nothing that would stand up to a simple, factual inquiry. The legend had become so ingrained that the men who lived it had no desire to question it. They needed their legend. It was a beacon, a symbol of what they were capable of, even when faced with the impossible. Miller's skepticism grew into a quiet obsession. He spent nights in his small barracks room, hunched over his laptop, running simulations. He used ballistic calculators, factoring in the wind, the distance, the weapon. Every calculation, every model he ran, came back with the same impossible result. The shot simply could not have been made. The bullet would have been thrown off course by meters, if not dozens of meters. The accuracy required was not just improbable, it was a physical impossibility. He decided to confront the legend head-on. He found Vance in the armory, meticulously cleaning his rifle, a piece of equipment that seemed to be an extension of his own body. The sergeant major looked up, his eyes cold and assessing. "Still poking around, Lieutenant?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "Some things are better left alone." "I'm just trying to understand, Sergeant Major," Miller said, trying to keep his voice from shaking. "The story, it doesn't add up. The ballistics, the wind speed, it's not possible." Vance's expression didn't change. He simply wiped the oil from his rifle, his movements slow and deliberate. "Maybe it's not meant to be understood by a man like you, Lieutenant," he said. "Maybe it's meant to be a reminder that a man can do the impossible when he has to." Miller took a deep breath. "Or maybe it's a lie." The silence that followed was heavy, a suffocating vacuum. Vance slowly put down his cloth, his eyes locking on Miller's. The coldness was gone, replaced by a flicker of something Miller could name, a mixture of resignation and a profound sadness. "Sit down," Lieutenant Vance said, his voice barely a whisper, "and I'll tell you the real story. It began not with a legend, but with a mistake. The mission was to observe, not to engage. The intel had confirmed that the high-value target, an insurgent commander named K. Organi, would be in the industrial complex for a meeting. Vance's team was to provide overwatch. They had a clear shot, but the orders from command were explicit: do not fire unless engaged. This was a reconnaissance mission to gather intelligence on Organi's network. The sniper's job was to watch, to report, to be a ghost. But the storm hit early. A ferocious, blinding torrent of sand that descended upon the complex like a biblical plague. Communications went down. The team on the ground was separated, disoriented. They were lost in a tempest of stinging sand and howling wind. They were running blind. Their only hope was to find a safe position and wait for the storm to pass. Vance was on his perch, a flimsy scaffold that swayed in the wind like a mast on a turbulent sea. He was 100 yards closer than the legend claimed, but it was still an impossible distance in a storm like this. He couldn't see his own rifle scope, let alone the target. Then a miracle happened. The wind dropped. For a single perfect moment, the world was still. The sand settled just enough for him to see, not his target, but his team. They had been cornered. A small band of Organi's men had found them, and a firefight was about to break out. Vance saw his men trapped, cornered, with no way out. He also saw Organi 100 yards away, standing in the open, oblivious to the chaos and preparing to enter a vehicle. The orders were to not engage, but a man's orders are meaningless when his brothers are about to die. He had a choice to make. He could take out Organi, a high-value target who had caused the deaths of countless soldiers, but in doing so he would be disobeying a direct order and risking the lives of his team, as the shot would give away their position. Or he could find a way to save his team, to give them cover, to get them out alive. "I made my choice," Vance said, his voice flat. "I didn't take the impossible shot, Lieutenant. I didn't kill Organi." Miller felt a cold wave of shock. The entire legend was a lie. "I aimed for the ground, Miller," Vance continued, his voice barely a whisper. "I fired into the dirt. A precise shot that kicked up a cloud of sand and dirt right in front of my team. It was a distraction. A moment of confusion. They had a few seconds, that's all they needed. In those few seconds, his team had a chance. They were able to break contact and find cover. The enemy was disoriented, their leaders shouting orders. In the chaos, men were confused. They turned on their own leader, a small, inconsequential argument that escalated into a full-blown firefight. The enemy was so focused on their internal conflict that they never saw the SEAL team retreat into the storm. Vance didn't kill Organi. One of Organi's own men did. The after-action report, Vance said, was a fabrication. "We had a medic on the team, Miller. He was a new guy, fresh out of the academy. He was terrified. He was scared. He was going to get a court-martial for the team's failure to get a clear shot. He asked me to help him write the report. He needed a hero to justify the mission. So, I gave him one. I gave him a ghost. The impossible shot. I said I had killed Organi. We made up the story together. It was a small lie, a simple detail to add to the report, something that would give us all a clean conscience and get us back home in one piece. We didn't know it would become a legend. It was never meant to be a legend." Miller sat in stunned silence. The story of a brave soldier saving his team from a storm of bullets was a good story, a worthy story, but the story they had created was better. It was the stuff of legends. It was a story that said that, even in the face of impossible odds, a man could win. It was a lie that gave hope, that gave faith, that gave meaning to a brutal, senseless war. Vance looked at him, his eyes filled with a sadness so profound it was almost a physical presence. "So, there you have it, Lieutenant. The impossible shot wasn't about a target. It was about a team. It was about a lie to save a man's reputation, to save his career, and in the end, it was a lie to give hope to a whole generation of men. So, what's it going to be, Miller? Are you going to tell them the truth? Are you going to tear down the legend and replace it with what? A good story, or a lie that's more true than the truth itself?" Miller left the armory that day a changed man. He had the truth, the secret behind the impossible shot. But as he sat at his desk, staring at the blank page, he realized he didn't want to write it. The truth was messy, complicated, and a little bit sad. The legend, however, was beautiful. It was a beacon, a symbol of what they were all fighting for. It was a story of hope, of miracles, and of a man who would do anything to save his team. He went back to his editor, Captain Jenkins. "I have the story, Captain," he said, his voice firm. "The real story. It's more than just a man and a rifle. It's about a man who faced the impossible, and in doing so created a legacy that will last forever." He wrote the story, not of a lie, but of a legend. He didn't reveal the secret behind the impossible shot. Instead, he painted a picture of a man who was so good, so skilled, and so dedicated that he could bend the very rules of the universe. He wrote about a man who had more faith in himself and his team than anyone else did. He wrote about a man who, when the world was blind, could still see. And in doing so, he created a new legend, a new myth, a new story that was more powerful than the truth itself. The impossible shot was a lie, but the legacy it created was very, very real. Vance, the ghost, was more of a hero for the lie he told than he ever was for the truth he lived. The article hit the wire a week later, published under the unassuming title The Ghost of Sam. It was a masterpiece of storytelling. Miller had meticulously crafted every sentence, weaving the known facts of the mission into a narrative that highlighted the near-impossible conditions and Vance's legendary poise. He had focused on the awe and respect of the other soldiers, on the almost spiritual quality of the shot, without ever stating the distance or the specifics that would have been proven false. He had, in essence, reported on the legend itself, not the event. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The article was shared across military forums, picked up by news outlets, and even found its way into a congressional briefing. Vance, the stoic, laconic sergeant major, became a national hero. He was decorated, invited to speak at ceremonies, and featured in recruiting videos. The myth became a powerful tool, a source of inspiration for a new generation of recruits. Miller, however, felt a strange kind of alienation. He was the architect of the legend, but he couldn't take credit. His colleagues congratulated him on the success of the article, but he knew the truth. He felt the weight of the lie, not as a burden of guilt, but as a profound sense of responsibility. He had created something beautiful and powerful, but it wasn't his to claim. He would see Vance from a distance, a legend in the flesh, and the sergeant major would give him a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a secret language between them, a silent acknowledgement of the truth they shared. Years passed. Miller rose through the ranks, his career defined by his work in public affairs. He was a master of his craft, a man who could tell a story that moved mountains. But he never forgot the man who had taught him the most important lesson of his life. He was a colonel now, a commander of his own public affairs unit. He was about to retire when he heard that Sergeant Major Elias Vance, now a retired veteran of 65, was living a quiet life in the Appalachian Mountains. Miller found him on a porch, the air thick with the smell of pine and the quiet hum of crickets. Vance was older, his hair a shock of white, his body a little slower, but his eyes were still the same. They held that same depth, that same unwavering focus. "I knew you'd come back one day, Miller," Vance said, his voice a little softer than Miller remembered, but with the same low rumble. "I had too," Miller said, sitting on the porch steps. "I never understood how you did it, how you could live with a lie." Vance smiled, a slow, gentle curve of his lips. "It wasn't a lie, Miller. It was a promise. I made a promise to my men that they would come home. I made a promise to a scared young medic that his career would be saved. I made a promise to myself that I would do everything in my power to ensure my team's survival." The story was just the vehicle for that promise. It was a reminder that we are all capable of more than we think, that even when the storm blinds us, there is still a way out. The bullet I fired into the dirt saved my men's lives. The story about the impossible shot saved their souls. It gave them a reason to believe in something bigger than themselves, bigger than the war. And that, son, is the most important thing a story can do. Miller looked at the old soldier, at the face that was now the face of a legend, and he finally understood. The truth he had chased was a fleeting thing, a single moment in time. The legend, however, was eternal. It was a beacon that would shine for generations, a testament to a man who, when faced with an impossible choice, chose not to be a hero, but to create one. And in that creation, he became the greatest hero of them all.